I thought I might talk a little bit about international water resources. I know a number of you have made this the focus of your research essay, but for those of you who haven't, we've talked about how water might lead to conflict within a particular country with intergroup conflict, but often the water scarcity or limited resources might actually provide an increased probability of cooperation. There's been some recent research in trying to look at this systematically, including by Gleditch, as we've already seen before. We've already seen it can be a source of conflict, though water is often an area in which there are incentives to have cooperation, even those cases in which countries have gone to war for other issues, like in India and Pakistan. The one thing you have to look at is trying to decide what cases you're actually going to look at. And so I thought it is interesting that there's a working group at Oregon State that have created a database of all freshwater disputes around the world in order to see exactly what types of disputes or what kind of resources the disputes are about, where they are, and what ends up happening to them. Just briefly, we've looked at river basins already, but you can see that there's a number of countries that do share international basins, river basins, and they go and they stretch all over the world, including in sub-Saharan Africa, as we've already seen, but also Europe and North America, South America, basically all continents that aren't just one country. And you see the outcomes of these river basins existing and states' incentives for cooperation, that you see the state interactions end up having agreements that don't bring in military or hostile acts, that there are agreements, either verbal or written agreements, though there is a lot of words used, though actions are a lot less common. So you see verbal hostility. There's 414 events in their data that there was a war of words, though not actions. Those are substantially less common at 56, while agreements, either verbal, over 620, and other written agreements and treaties, over 157 water treaties were actually reached, that the likelihood of cooperation is possible. It does actually happen, as opposed to these kind of highly salient conflict events. And so, as I mentioned already in this class, that the tendency can look at the exceptions, the conflicts, the wars, but 98% of the time, countries don't have a civil war. So civil wars only occur in 2% of state years in most of the samples that you look at, and international conflict is the same or even more rare. And so when you do have these exceptional events actually happen, you see in conflict what the debate is actually about, that over half of the conflict events is about how much of the water actually flows from one country to the next. We talked about this in the river basin in Central Asia, with Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan having the resources, and downstream states, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, trying to get them to release it at specific times of the year or giving them more quantity. The Nile Basin is one that people have talked a lot about, with the creation of the Ethiopian dam creating potential issues for downstream states like Egypt that could lead to a war of words, or potentially an opportunity for collaboration with the electricity being generated by this dam. But the cooperative events are more varied about the topics. Water quantity is one area, but dams, quality, working together to actually jointly manage these projects are areas in which there is some hope and optimism that when there is both scarcity issues as well as quality issues, and how much of the pie different states actually get, there are opportunities for international responses that are collaborative, which is, I think, distinct from what we're going to look at in the Arctic, and what there's been a lot of efforts towards multilateral cooperation, but they're nowhere near as advanced, and there's potential for more military jockeying than with the water resources that we've already covered. So let's start talking about the military and economic incentives for getting involved in Arctic, in which states find it easier to access.